Hello, I'm Harminda Falora, and this is mine and Deepla Nagarajan's answer to the question, does behaviour fossilise? We started with a more literal interpretation of the question and looked at real-life fossils. We found that teeth provide loads of evidence on the possible dietary habits of certain species. For example, in the fossil record, it's possible to view the shift in the diet of elephants from browsing to grazing around 8 million years ago. Morphological adaptations better suited to East Africa's tough, gritty grasslands, such as larger crowns and increased enamel ridges, were more prevalent in elephant teeth around 5 million years ago. This was around the same time that much of the area's woodland was being reduced to grassy plains by periods of intense climate change. This evolutionary example implies that elephants only made the switch from shrubs in response to this selection pressure. By contrast, carbon isotope analysis suggests differently. Isotopes common in grass plants were also found in tooth fossils roughly 3 million years before adaptations for such food sources had been developed. This means that elephants were actually selecting grass at a time when woodland options were very much still on the menu. We can therefore infer, through fossils, changes in animal behaviour by studying morphological changes and analysing the carbon isotope. We then viewed the question under a more metaphorical lens and found that innate behaviours in animals, such as web building, nest building and imprinting, require no learning since they're genetically encoded. They all therefore are preserved or fossilised over time through the generations. We were intrigued by this since, as far as we were aware, genes coded for proteins, not behaviour. We found that innate behaviours are controlled by neural circuits in the brain. The proteins coded for by DNA make up the neurons which make up these neural circuits. Therefore, our innate behaviours are dictated by our DNA. We know that, over time, natural selection favours individuals with genetic mutations that aid survival. Therefore, if one individual possessed a mutation which enhanced a certain neural circuit, for example one controlling imprinting, their chances of survival would be increased. They are more likely to reproduce, passing on their advantageous allele to the next generation. Over time, this mutation becomes cemented in the genome of the whole species, leading to a widespread adoption of dependable innate behaviours. So ultimately, these same innate behaviours and the genes from which they are coded are passed down, preserved and metaphorically fossilised through the generations. This got us thinking about whether it would be possible to find evidence for these same innate behaviours in the fossil record, since certain fossils like bones can be used to extract DNA. After an organism dies, however, its DNA typically only has a half-life of about 521 years. This means DNA can only really be extracted in fragments. That being said, with the knowledge that innate behaviours are genetically encoded, there is a definite possibility that the fragment of DNA which codes for a particular behaviour could be extracted from a fossil. This means that these same innate behaviours, which are already fossilised metaphorically, are also fossilised physically. Meanwhile, trace fossils contain a multitude of evidence for animal behaviour based on things like speed, locomotion, direction, and much more. We, however, were again particularly interested to see if these same innate behaviours could be accounted for through trace fossils. Rheotaxis, an innate behaviour, is the movement or orientation of an organism in response to a water current. Trace fossils from roughly 600 million years ago showed that an anchor-shaped organism called Parvan corona, which lived on the seafloor, had a clear preference for facing into water currents. This means it practiced positive rheotaxis. This further backs up that it is also possible for these same innate behaviours to fossilise not only metaphorically, but physically too. So in summary, behaviour can fossilise in a number of different ways. In the most literal sense of the question, changes in morphology and isotopic composition of fossils over time allow us to make judgments on how and when species may have altered its behaviour, both in response to a selection pressure and through preference. However, innate behaviour could be interpreted as fossilising metaphorically through history by natural selection and the preservation of certain genes through the generation. What's more, these same genes responsible for innate behaviours can also be extracted from preserved DNA in fossils, providing a physical form of fossilisation too. Aligning with this, there is also evidence for innate behaviours in trace fossils, like taxes in kinesis. So we can say that innate behaviours fossilise in two ways, both metaphorically and physically. So on the whole, we are confident in saying, yes, behaviour does fossilise in many different ways.